Hands can do incredible things. Now they can even help save a life with hands-only CPR. If you see an adult suddenly collapse, just call 911, then push hard and fast in the center of the chest until help arrives. Learn more at handsonlycpr.org.
There is also a very attractive extended warranty option that includes free service and parts for the next 5 years. But there's no need for you to get that. You failed to get the test you needed at the doctor that would have detected disease early enough where it could have been treated. So you won't be around in 2 years to see him grow up, which means the warranty would be useless. Okay, sign here, please.
For a list of tests every man should have, go to ahrq.gov.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Coming up, freedom of speech on the web. Do we really have all the rights afforded to us under the U.S. Constitution, especially if we want to post on a social media site? Plus, we debate whether stricter gun laws could have prevented the deadly shootings in Aurora, Colorado and Oak Creek, Wisconsin. How will these high-profile shootings play out in court? All this and more, so stay right here because today's verdict starts right now. Welcome to today's verdict, the show that gives you your legal rights and options. I'm your host and trial attorney for the next 30 minutes, David Lesh. Back in May, lawmakers in New York proposed a bill labeled the Internet Protection Act as part of an initiative to stop cyberbullying. If enacted, the bill would give individuals the ability to remove anonymous posts filled with hate from websites owned and operated by New York-based companies. The new law would require these websites to have either a toll-free number or email address for victims of cyberbullying to contact. But if a complaint is filed, the website administrator will be required to contact the original commentator, who was then given 48 hours to identify themselves as the author of the anonymous post, or else the comment will be deleted. Although the legislation would only affect New York-based websites such as blogs and newspapers, lawmakers standing behind the bill are hoping it will start a nationwide conversation and one day become a federal law. Now the question is banning anonymous online posting a violation of our First Amendment rights? And also, what about freedom of the press? Is this bill just another governmental plot to regulate the web? Joining us today from California via Skype is an expert ready to break down our First Amendment protections as they exist online. Please welcome Senior Staff Attorney at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Matt Zimmerman. Matt, can you hear me? Matt, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I look at these blogs and the social websites, and the first thing I see when I look at the comments is how nasty people can be and how mean the comments are. Is it a trend? Has it always been that way? Or is it just something that I'm just starting to notice for the first time?
I don't think it's necessarily a trend that there's a higher percentage of nasty comments online. I think what you're seeing is the fact that more and more people are actually going online than ever before. Certainly we have more negative comments than we had 10 years ago, but we also have a lot more positive and completely socially constructive comments than ever before. No. So yeah, I don't think it's necessarily that people are becoming meaner.
You know, Matt, in the past, if you had an issue with something and you wrote to a newspaper, usually an editor would take a look at it before it would be posted, you know, in the newspaper itself. Now, there's no editing. You go right on the social website and you put your comment on, and it could lead to some disastrous results, you know, for instance, in the area of bullying. What is your feeling or your position on people who post things on certain websites and it leads to these types of results?
It's certainly the case that you have today the same legal rights that you did in the offline space. If you go online and you post something defamatory otherwise unprotected by the First Amendment, you can be held legally accountable. You can file a lawsuit. You can try to obtain the identity of the person who said it. So you definitely have the ability to pursue a claim if someone steps over the First Amendment line.
Yeah, but you see how hard it is to find out who it is who's posted the comment. You know, I think just today we were learning that somebody on Twitter was posting something where they they might take action against some individuals in a harmful way, and Twitter was reluctant to give up the name of the person who did this. So certainly in these social media sites, someone who's making a comment, you might suggest, well, it's, you can find out who the identity is, but I don't think that's so easy to do.
Well, it shouldn't be easy. If we're thinking about the same case having to do with Twitter, there was a case in the last few weeks where a UK publisher decided that he really didn't like people making fun of him on Twitter, and so he filed a bogus lawsuit in the US purely for the purpose of kind of trumping up an ability to obtain the identity of his critic. And Twitter, to their credit, said, no, we're not going to do that automatically. We're going to give the person who spoke an ability to fight back. And the second the speaker fought back and said, actually, I have a First Amendment right, the person, the publisher caved. So we all have a First Amendment right to speak and to speak anonymously. This is, part of the foundation of the country. The Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers were all written with pseudonyms. They weren't actually, tagged with the author of the statements. And in that situation, it was because the authors feared retaliation. That same First Amendment tradition, or that same free expression tradition, carries through into the First Amendment today. So I don't think anyone really wants, or at least has thought through the implications of saying we just want to demand that anyone who ever speaks anywhere online must turn over their identity without, at minimum, a court taking a look and deciding whether the claim is valid or not.
Well, certainly, playing devil's advocate, you can make the argument that if we had known about some of the white supremacist groups that are online and some of their hate speech, we might be able to identify somebody who may go through with a particular plot before they go through with the plot. It's hard to not, want to try and prevent certain situations from occurring. I guess it's a fine line, freedom of speech versus trying to protect the public as a whole. I think you can understand, though, the other side that would like to have some of this information so we can do some background checks of some of these individuals to prevent them from creating havoc.
Sure, and there are federal laws on the books now, have been for decades, that will allow law enforcement or the FBI or whoever to be able to obtain this kind of information. It requires a court process. It requires a court to evaluate the claim, and if it turns out that the information is necessary for law enforcement to go forward, they can get it. The bills that you're talking about are very different. They simply say that no one can say anything about anybody online, that there's an obligation for the web host to take down any anonymous comment that is said about another person. It doesn't have to be defamatory, doesn't have to be illegal, doesn't have to be negative at all. It just simply, the bill proposal in the last version I saw said simply, if you speak anonymously about someone in any capacity, that person has a heckler's veto. It gets to say, I just don't like people talking about me, so it comes down. So I think the notion that law enforcement is somehow hampered in its ability to track down crime is a bit of a red herring and has nothing to do with the really spectacular overreach that we see in bills like the ones we're talking about today.
Oh, well, that's fair, but where do you draw the line then? What would you think is fair game for somebody from law enforcement to be able to go into somebody's private account and find out if they're the person who's posting? What post would you say is fair game?
I think the question is whether or not the statement is protected by the First Amendment. If it's someone simply expressing protected, First Amendment speech, then I don't want law enforcement, prying into the private lives of me or other Americans. However, again, if they cross the line and, for example, are inciting imminent lawlessness, then that's okay. But again, it's why the courts are there. It's not, we shouldn't be creating processes that by default simply say, you website operator have to be the one deciding as a judge, effectively as a judge, whether people are allowed to speak or speak anonymously. I think it's just a really wrong-headed approach here.
Well, Matt, listen, I want to thank you. It's something we're not going to be able to solve tonight, the freedom of speech debate, but I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
All right, you're welcome. We have to take a quick break, but coming up, we will examine this country's gun laws and discuss how they've impacted on the shootings that have recently engulfed our nation. We'll be right back.
G-Morning, sunshine. Wakey, wakey. Text me. Are your parents home later? We can hang. LUV, love you. JK. Holla back. Holla back. Holla back. Are you with your friends? That's lame. We're in a huge fight right now. XO. What'd you dream about? Something I did. Are you on your way to the mall? I'm lonely. Nude pics. Send me some. Text me.
Did you find the flashlight and the batteries?
Yes.
Did you make sure we're not missing anything in the first aid kit?
Yep.
Did you go through the plan with the kids again?
Yes. The more you prepare today, the more you'll be able to reduce the devastating effects of a tornado, an earthquake, a power outage, or any other disaster. Welcome home, man.
Welcome back. I'm your host, David Lesh. We at Today's Verdict want to hear from you. So send us your questions, comments, or show ideas to David Lesh at bronxnet.org or post a comment on our Facebook page at facebook.com/todaysverdict. Over the last few weeks, tragedy has struck our nation. The deadly shootings in Aurora, Colorado claimed the lives of 12, and in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, 6 lives were lost. These shootings put into perspective the failure of our nation's gun laws to address a serious threat to the safety of Americans. Were these states lax in enforcing gun laws or profiling gun owners? Are we now looking at a possible change in gun regulations on a national level? And I'm sure the National Rifle Association has an opinion. Joining us for a discussion on the topic is criminal defense attorneys Douglas Rankin of Douglas Rankin and Associates and Peter Tillum of Tillum and Campbell PC. Counselors, welcome to the show. Peter, I'm going to hit it with you first. Are the laws too lax? Do you think more has to be done? What's going on?
I don't think the laws are too lax. Gun laws in the United States are very funny. We have a love-hate relationship with guns, and we have a constitutional amendment which kind of gets in the way of maybe things that we would want to do. Recently, the Supreme Court has strengthened actually the constitutional provisions and the way those are interpreted. So it would be very hard to do a lot to ban guns.
You know, my problem is, and it seems to be Mayor Bloomberg's issue as well, it seems that anybody can get their hold on a gun if they really want to. And it doesn't look like any laws are really putting any teeth into preventing people from picking up an illegal weapon. And that's my issue with what's going on. Do you find, in terms of the practice of law, that you find there are a lot of illegal guns that that end up into the possession of people who shouldn't have it?
Heroin and cocaine have been banned in this country for decades, and they're readily available pretty much any place you look. Guns are complicated because, as I said, there's a constitutional amendment. The fact is that in places where there's more gun control, like New York City, we have more gun crime. There's been absolutely no link shown that demonstrates that gun control actually saves lives.
Well, Doug, you know, let me actually get to you now, because you actually wore a different hat at one time. You were in,
Yes.
in the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office, so you were prosecuting.
Yes.
How important is it for us, as a society, especially in New York, to try and take these guns off the streets? Do they lead to other types of crimes, just the mere possessing of a gun?
Well, you know, you've seen in the news recently how just merely possessing a gun can end up in tragedy. And when I was a district attorney, the gun laws were actually raised. It was raised from a D felony with a minimum of 2 years and a maximum of 7 years here in New York State to a C felony, which was 3.5 minimum to 15 years. And as Peter stated, gun laws in New York State are probably one of the strictest in the country.
Okay. Now, put the hat back on. You're
Right.
now a criminal defense attorney. You're
Right.
now prosecuting out here. Are you finding clients who are coming in being prosecuted for having a gun? And is it a gun that's in their car? Is it a gun that's in their house?
Simple possession now is treated just like a person who may have had a gun and he was about to rob a liquor store. It does not differentiate. I have clients who literally have legal permits for guns out of state who come into New York, get pulled over for a simple traffic ticket, forgot that they had something in the trunk of their car which was legal in the state where their license plate was, and are prosecuted for C felonies, just like a person who was about to rob a store and had a gun in his car.
Okay, now, Peter, way back when you were actually on the show, we discussed, we had a little Plaxico Burress discussion. I don't know if you remember, way back when we talked a little bit about the gun possession in the bar. Are you finding that individuals are still walking around the streets with illegal guns, or are they starting to smarten up? Or because these shootings are starting to happen in our city now, whether it's at, after a basketball game, or there was a young boy who was playing tennis the other day. Yep. Do you find this has been happening? People are coming into your office with these types of issues?
People are still carrying guns. There was a big public campaign after the change in the law. Everyone knows that it's a minimum of 3.5 years in prison, and people are still running around with illegal guns. Right. But we also, in my practice, see a lot of people who innocently possess guns because they came from Texas or Alabama, came here, didn't realize they were committing a violent felony.
Right, there was that one woman who came up from Texas, remember, and they did a scan through the metal detectors at World Trade, down in the World Trade Center site, and she said, I didn't know. We drove up here, but ignorance is not an excuse when it comes to gun possession,
right.
Correct?
That's correct.
And isn't it important that the viewers actually see this and they understand that?
Yes.
It's very important.
Okay, Doug, let me get back to you.
Sure.
You're trying a case now, all right? And you're defending somebody for gun possession. What's the excuse? What could you possibly do to try and help do you plead these out? What do you do?
Well, I actually try a lot of gun cases. I've tried at least 25 gun cases. And the majority of these gun cases deal with the issue of knowing possession. A lot of times what happens in the law, there's more than one person in a car, it's a car stop. The law provides for a presumption that everyone knows that everyone is presumed to know that the gun is in the car, even though it may not necessarily be the case. So,
especially if you're in the back seat, how do you know there's a gun in the glove?
Those are the majority of the cases, the gun presumption cases I call them, where you have somebody who's in the car who may not know that a weapon was in the car at the time.
All right, well, this is good stuff. I got a lot more to ask both you gentlemen, all right? But we have to take a quick break. But coming up, we'll find out what our legal experts think the future holds for gun laws here in the United States. We'll be right back.
There is also a very attractive extended warranty option that includes free service and parts for the next 5 years. But there's no need for you to get that. You failed to get the test you needed at the doctor that would have detected disease early enough where it could have been treated. So you won't be around in 2 years to see him grow up, which means the warranty would be useless. Okay, sign here, please.
For a list of tests every man should have, go to ahrq.gov.
Welcome back. I'm your host, David Lesh. We, today's verdict, want to hear from you. So send us your questions, comments, or show ideas to David Lesh at bronxnet.org. And you can also follow us on Twitter at Today's Verdict. On today's show, we've been discussing the high-profile cases surrounding the 2 deadly shootings that occurred in Aurora, Colorado and Oak Creek, Wisconsin. and whether these two incidents will impact on the future of gun possession in the areas of the United States. We turn back to our legal experts to see if stricter gun laws are needed in preventing these types of shootings. Mr. Rankin and Mr. Tillum, thanks again for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
As a litigator myself, and talking a little bit in terms of the civil litigation, I always look to see if anyone else can be held responsible besides just the shooter. Peter, I'm going to start with you. If you had to think of another person who might be responsible, would it be maybe the person who sold the gun to the shooter, or with respect to the movie theater, the person who was running the theater, and maybe there were different exits that should have been closed? What do you think in terms of liability here?
Well, I think as attorneys, we think of all of the above. It sounds very difficult to sue a gun owner, the gun seller. The gun operated the way it was supposed to operate. Right. The movie theater, maybe they had enough security, maybe they didn't. They would certainly need to have an expert review that.
Well, you know, first of all, with respect to the shootings that occurred with Aurora, you had a psychiatrist who was actually examining this fellow at some point. Maybe she could be held responsible for not putting forth a better diagnosis, not letting the college know what was going on, or maybe even the college themselves. Maybe the college should have been regulating the monies that were being given to him, which he obviously was using to buy weapons. What are your thoughts?
There was a case in California in 1976. It was the Tarasov case. Very high-profile case, and a college student was actually murdered by another college student who was under the care of a psychiatrist at the university. And the California Supreme Court actually set out a standard by which psychiatrists and psychologists could be held liable. So there's a body of law in which school psychologists or psychiatrists could be held liable.
Well, let's see, Doug, let's talk about the military. Maybe we can, the military trains these guys, and the military gives them the knowledge on how to use a weapon. Can we look at them? Can we look to somebody else besides just the shooter to possibly make the victims, the families, whole? Right.
Well, I think the military would be a little tough.
Okay.
I think national security interests, we have to have a military that defends our country. So if we all of a sudden made them liable for every time a former military man commits a crime, that would create a very big problem. To piggyback a little off what Peter said, though, you know, in terms of the body of law that it has developed regarding what a psychiatrist and the duty a psychiatrist owes, if there's a specific act of harm that is told to a psychiatrist or any person who has a privilege, and they know that that person has said, I'm going to do a specific act of crime, they have a duty at that point to warn and tell others. So there it could be where the liability comes into place.
Okay, well which leads me to the next question, is to a national gun law. Something that, you know, really encompasses everybody and everything. Any opinions on where you think we should be going with this type of situation?
Well, I don't believe gun control works.
Okay.
What it's done in New York is disarmed honest people and given the criminals free rein. The criminals seem to possess guns. They walk around with the guns and they don't care. You go to places like Florida and Texas. Actually, most states in this country now have very liberal gun laws. And the reality is they have a lot less crime than exists in places with very strict gun control laws.
Doug, your opinion, what do you think? Do we think we need a national gun law? Do you think it's going to make a difference? Is it like legalizing marijuana? I mean, what are your thoughts?
In every one of my cases, they do one of two things. They either do a gun trace, which is basically check the serial number to see where the gun came from, or if there is a serial number crossed out, they do a serial restoration. 9 times out of 10, the gun comes from one of the states down south where you can walk in to a Walmart and buy a gun.
It's foreign for me in New York City to think that this can happen, but you could just walk in
just
and grab a gun.
walk in and grab a gun. So as I have to say, if that were not possible, maybe you wouldn't see so many here in New York.
Okay, now, either one of you gentlemen, you're representing the shooter, all right? You're putting forth a defense. Peter, what's the defense that you would put forth?
The only defense here is psychiatric. That's the only defense. There's witnesses. He's caught right at the scene with a gun, wearing body armor. It's him.
Okay, so we're talking an insanity defense.
We're talking an insanity.
My understanding of the insanity defense was that you have to know what you were doing in the cause of good, as opposed to carrying out the wishes of the devil, let's say, you know, which is, I think, why the son of Sam couldn't use it or whatever. Does it look like the shooter in the Aurora shooting has a chance of being successful with an insanity defense?
Criminal attorneys are lawyers, not magicians, and it's going to be very hard to get him off. In order to be successful with a psychiatric defense, you have to show that he really didn't know the nature and consequences of what he was doing. And the fact is, you're talking about a guy who thought ahead enough to booby trap his apartment because he realized the police would be coming there after the shooting, and he wanted to kill more people.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be hard.
Doug, what do you think?
It's impossible.
Impossible.
It's impossible.
Scale of 1 to 10. It's a
Scale
0.
of 1 to 10. Case like Colorado, it's impossible. I've had a psychiatric defense. It's very difficult. The prosecution gets their expert to analyze your client. They sit down. They have as many interviews as they like. You have to put forth your reasons for why you're claiming the psychiatric defense. They have a year or two to analyze it. In this type of case,
And
almost
lastly,
impossible.
Peter made it seem that gun laws really make a difference. Yes or no? Make a difference or no?
You know, every state is not like New York. I would like to. I wonder what it would be like if every state were more like New York.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah.
All right, well, gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for being here. You promise you're going to come back, right?
Absolutely, Dave.
Sure will.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's all for tonight. It's now time to deliberate. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us, and of course, you for watching. Remember, if there's a legal issue or topic you would like to see on the show, email me at davidlesh@bronxnet.org. And until we see you again, always remember, know your rights, know your issues, reach a verdict. We will see you next time.